Imagine a country that shrinks its economy by like 13% in a single year,
Yeah.
right? But somehow its citizens still sit firmly in the global high-income bracket.
Right.
And it's a country that emits more carbon per person than these massive industrial titans. Yet, and this is the crazy part, they've managed to protect 100% of their ocean territory. So, welcome to our deep dive. Today, we are looking at the absolute paradox of Palau.
Yeah, it really is a statistical and geopolitical puzzle. I mean,
Yeah.
it defies almost every conventional model of how a nation is actually supposed to operate.
Mhm.
What we're looking at is a microstate trying to navigate a world that is, entirely designed for massive industrialized superpowers.
Exactly. And we have a really fascinating mission today because I want you, yes, you listening right now, to join us as we sift through this huge stack of sources. We've got this really robust National Development Research Report, plus decades of annual monitoring data from the World Bank.
Yeah, and the United Nations developmental reports as well.
Right. So we have all this granular data covering Palau's economic, demographic, and environmental metrics. And our goal is to uncover basically the ultimate survival guide for a tiny nation in an incredibly turbulent world.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because the mystery we're looking at today is just totally
It
counterintuitive.
really is.
Like, how does an island with a population smaller than a standard university campus hit the very top of global governance charts? I want you to just imagine for a second that you are holding the fate of a fragile island nation in your hands.
It's a lot of pressure.
Oh, massive pressure. You have incredibly limited land, the ocean around you is quite literally rising, and the global economy is constantly shifting. Every single decision you make is magnified 1,000 times over because you just don't have like the buffer of a billion-dollar industrial sector to fall back on. So where do you even begin to build resilience?
Well, what's fascinating here is that in a world of just constant information overload, Palau serves as this perfect microcosm. It allows us to observe, in a highly constrained environment, how institutional governance acts as a shock absorber. A shock absorber. I like that.
Yeah, because when you lack vast natural resources and you don't have military might and your economy is just completely at the mercy of global winds,
Yeah.
governance isn't just administrative overhead. It's not just paperwork. Governance is the primary productive force that keeps your entire society from collapsing.
Wow. Okay, so you really have to begin with the board you're playing on, right? The actual geographic and demographic reality. Because that basically dictates every single subsequent policy choice.
Exactly. And Palau's total land area is a mere 460 square kilometers.
Which is tiny.
It is. I mean, that is smaller than the city limits of a lot of mid-sized municipalities around the world. And the total population hovers right around 18,000 people.
Less than a sold-out arena for, like, a professional basketball game.
Yeah.
And that population isn't just small. The data shows it's actually been shrinking, right?
Yeah, the recent figures show negative growth rates. They're seeing somewhere between a 1.5 and 1.7% decline.
Which creates this immediate baseline threat. But before we even get to the human capital flight, the people leaving, we have to look at how that tiny population size creates these wild statistical illusions.
Oh, definitely.
Especially when we look at the environment, which is like the first major paradox in the data.
Yeah.
If you pull up the World Bank environmental tracking, Palau's GDP carbon intensity, so that's the amount of carbon dioxide emitted per unit of economic output, it has, in certain years, wildly exceeded that of many massive industrialized nations.
Right, which sounds terrible on paper.
Exactly. On paper, it looks like they're an absolute ecological nightmare. But then you look at their actual conservation record, and they are absolute world leaders in marine protection. So how can a country be an extreme polluter per person, but like a global savior of the oceans at the exact same time?
Well, it comes down to the vulnerability of small numbers.
Yeah.
And really the baseline cost of sovereignty. And let's visualize the mechanism here.
Mm.
If you have a population under 20,000 people, the denominator in any per-person calculation is just incredibly small.
Oh, right. I see where this is going. It's like, okay, imagine renting a massive diesel-guzzling industrial generator just to keep the lights on in a tiny studio apartment because the city power grid doesn't reach you. The energy usage for that one apartment looks completely insane compared to a normal apartment building.
That is the perfect analogy. Palau is geographically isolated. They don't share a power grid with a continent. To maintain modern civilization, which means having a functioning international airport, running a hospital with 247 life support systems, and operating water desalination plants.
Which all require constant heavy power.
Exactly. They have to import fossil fuels. You cannot run an entire sovereign nation's baseline infrastructure on a handful of solar panels, at least not with current technology, so they rely heavily on diesel generators.
And because you're taking the massive carbon footprint of an entire national power grid and international shipping logistics and dividing it by only 18,000 people, the mathematical result per person just skyrockets.
Precisely. It has absolutely nothing to do with those 18,000 people living these recklessly wasteful lifestyles. It's just the minimum entry fee for existing as a sovereign nation in the 21st century.
Right.
And that minimum entry fee applies to everything. If a single new mid-sized facility opens in Palau, it causes a percentage swing in their national metrics that would look like an industrial revolution on a global chart. The data is incredibly noisy just because the sample size is so small.
Okay, I do want to push back on this a little bit, though, because if the population is only 18,000 people, isn't it relatively easy to govern?
You would think so.
I mean, why is their success considered a global model? Managing an entire country the size of a small rural county just seems, I don't know, manageable. You wouldn't look at a well-run local neighborhood association and say the entire world should copy their blueprint.
It is a really common misconception. But, a neighborhood association doesn't have to negotiate international fishing treaties.
Oh, fair point.
A neighborhood association relies on a broader city for its water, a state for its highways, and a national government for its defense, its monetary policy, and its international trade agreements.
Right, they have a safety net.
Exactly.
Oh.
Palau is a sovereign nation. Those 18,000 people have to generate their own macroeconomic policy. They have to manage an exclusive economic zone in the ocean that is vastly larger than their landmass.
Ah, so they have the massive administrative responsibilities of a standard country, but they only have a small-town talent pool to actually staff the entire government.
Yes.
They need specialized constitutional lawyers, neurosurgeons, environmental scientists, diplomats, but they have to find all of them within a pool of 18,000 people.
And that brings us right back to the shrinking population. When your population declines by 1.5%, you aren't just losing numbers. You are losing critical institutional knowledge. Human capital is quite literally the most precious resource a microstate has. Every single engineer or doctor who leaves for opportunities abroad leaves this structural hole in the nation's ability to maintain its independence.
Which means the economy is inherently fragile by design. Because the geographic footprint is so small, you obviously don't have a massive domestic market to trade with itself. You can't rely on internal consumption to drive growth. You are completely exposed to the outside world.
Go completely. The economic roller coaster is staggering. If you look at the GDP growth rate over the last few decades, we see historical economic contractions plunging as low as negative 12.3% and even negative 13.26% in a single year.
Let's just pause on that for a second, a 13% contraction. In a major global economy like the US or the EU, a drop of 2 or 3% sends the stock markets into an absolute panic. It dominates the news cycle, governments scramble to pass bailouts. A 13% drop isn't a recession. That is the bottom completely falling out of the economy.
It is a devastating macroeconomic shock. But here is the second layer of the paradox. Despite these brutal double-digit drops in domestic production, if you look at the gross national income, or GNI per capita, it hovered around $18,000 in recent years.
Really?
Yeah. That figure actually places Palau firmly in the high-income country category according to global classifications.
Wait, I need to make sure I understand the mechanics of this. How does the country's economy contract by 13%, but the citizens are still walking around with high income status? That implies a massive disconnect between what is happening on the island and the actual money in people's pockets.
The disconnect is monumental, and it lies in the structural realities of their economy. The data shows that agriculture and industry are virtually non-existent in Palau.
I mean, you can't build massive manufacturing plants on 460 square kilometers of pristine island.
Exactly. So the service sector heavily dominates. It accounts for 70 to 80% of the total GDP. And when we say service sector in Palau, we are really talking about one very specific mechanism.
Tourism.
Tourism.
So tourism is their single window to the world. The reports show it represents 80 to 90% of all their service exports.
And tourism is incredibly sensitive to external shocks. When global disruptions hit like the massive supply chain and travel freezes we saw around 2020, their tourism exports disastrously crashed to around 40% of their previous levels.
Wow, down to 40%.
Yeah, when the planes stop flying, Palau's domestic production basically stops. That is what triggers a 13% GDP drop.
Okay, let me try another analogy here. Palau's domestic economy is essentially like a beautiful, high-end restaurant on a really remote mountain road, and they only serve one dish to passing tourists. When a storm hits, the road closes, the tourists can't get there, and the restaurant makes absolutely zero money. The business side of it is completely devastated.
Right.
But, and here's the G&I part, like the restaurant owner's still wearing nice clothes and paying their mortgage because they receive a generous trust fund from a wealthy relative every month. So the domestic business is volatile, but the owner's personal income is perfectly stable.
That captures the dynamic perfectly.
Hmm.
In this case, the trust fund is international aid, grants, and net primary income from abroad.
Oh.
The gross national income captures this external financial support.
Okay, that makes sense.
It artificially elevates the wealth of the residents, buffering them from those brutal cliff edge drops in their own domestic tourism production.
But if I'm looking at this from a systemic risk perspective, that high income status is actually a massive vulnerability, isn't it? Like, if you are a high-income nation, but you don't grow your own food and you don't manufacture your own goods, a global supply chain shock doesn't just mean inflation. If ships literally cannot reach the island, all the G&I in the world, all that money sitting in the bank, doesn't matter if there is no physical food or medicine to buy.
It is the absolute definition of a structurally imbalanced economy.
Hmm.
They have the financial wealth to purchase what they need, but they completely lack the physical resilience of self-sufficiency. They are inextricably tied to the goodwill and logistical functionality of the outside world.
Which raises a really, really important question. Why does that international aid keep flowing? Why are international organizations and foreign governments so willing to essentially underwrite the financial stability of this microstate, keeping their G&I so high despite all the volatility?
Right, because nobody gives a trust fund to someone who is just going to gamble it away.
Or just straight up steal it.
Exactly. To maintain that flow of international support and to manage an economy that volatile without collapsing into total chaos, a country needs an absolutely impeccable reputation. The donors have to know the money's being deployed effectively.
Oh, and this leads us directly to the secret weapon of Palau. The real reason they survive, and the reason they are a global model, it's their governance.
It is.
Let's look at the worldwide governance indicators. So these are comprehensive metrics used by global institutions to evaluate how well a country is run. According to the data, Palau consistently ranks above the 80th percentile globally for voice and accountability.
And let's explore how that actually functions on the ground, because voice and accountability measures the extent to which a country's citizens are able to participate in selecting their government, right? As well as freedom of expression, freedom of association, and a free media.
Right.
Being above the 80th percentile means Palau is functioning at a highly democratic, highly transparent level. They are outperforming a vast majority of the world's nations, many of which are exponentially richer and more powerful.
And it goes way deeper than just voting. Their rule of law is consistently in the 70th to 80th percentile, and their control of corruption has seen a significant rise over the years, stabilizing right around the 70th percentile, which, by the way, perfectly tracks with their highly rated government effectiveness.
Yeah, this is what economists refer to as institutional dividends. We often think of democracy, free speech, and anti-corruption measures as like moral victories. We think of them as ethical aspirations.
Right, the things you do to be a good country.
Exactly. But in the context of a microstate like Palau, they are not just moral victories, they are economic life rafts.
Because it acts like a massive corporate audit for foreign investors. If the World Bank or a donor country is looking to invest millions of dollars in climate resilience infrastructure, they need to know that money isn't going to vanish into some politician's offshore account.
Exactly. Palau's incredibly high-level governance provides the institutional endorsement required to attract and maintain that money. Their transparency is literally their most valuable currency.
Yeah.
It ensures that every dollar of aid is deployed effectively, maximizing its impact on the ground.
I always marvel at how they actually execute this. Because you look at so many resource-poor or aid-dependent countries globally, and they are absolutely plagued by corruption. Aid money comes in, and it just vanishes into the bureaucracy. But here's Palau holding the line.
Yeah.
But I have to wonder, does this extreme transparency happen just because everyone literally knows everyone else in an 18,000-person country? Like, if the mayor buys a new luxury car with stolen funds, the whole island is going to know by dinner time, right? Or is this a deliberate, hard-fought policy?
Well, social proximity definitely plays a role, but it's a double-edged sword. Yes, it can act as a deterrent to petty corruption because you can't hide easily, but social proximity can also lead to extreme cronyism and nepotism.
Oh, that's true.
It's very easy in a small system for a few powerful families to capture all the resources, control the local economy, and just agree not to tell on each other.
Right, the you scratch my back, I scratch yours dynamic. So the fact that they score so high on rule of law means they've actually built systems to counteract that human nature.
Exactly. The high government effectiveness means they have actively built independent institutions, robust courts, and strict audit systems that supersede informal social pressure. They have legally formalized their transparency.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, this is a profound lesson for the rest of the world. Mega nations often tolerate a certain level of corruption as just, the cost of doing business because their economies are massive enough to absorb the waste. But Palau is proving the raw, tangible economic value of anti-corruption measures. Efficient resource allocation is literally a survival mechanism for them. They have extremely tight fiscal space. They just cannot afford waste. Stripping out corruption is a primary driver of their national stability.
But, good governance doesn't just spontaneously generate from the soil. You can write the best anti-corruption laws in the world, but it requires highly capable, highly educated people to execute them. You need sharp lawyers, dedicated civil servants, and an engaged populace to keep those institutions alive.
Which brings us to the actual people, the human capital and the demographic clock of Palau. And the data here is absolutely fascinating, but honestly, it points to a looming crisis.
It does.
The structure of their population is undergoing a massive shift. The 0 to 14 age group is steadily declining, while the 65 and older group is rising.
Yeah.
And the old age dependency ratio, so that's the number of elderly people compared to the number of working age people, that has climbed from under 10% to nearly 16%.
This is a phenomenon demographers call the silver shadow. And ironically, it is a direct consequence of Palau's massive success in public health and education over the past few decades.
Wait. If life expectancy goes up but the birth rate drops, you're basically looking at an upside-down population pyramid.
Exactly.
So who is paying for the health care of the elderly if the workforce is shrinking?
That is the crux of the issue. Let's look at how they actually got here. Their basic drinking water and sanitation coverage are near 100%. Think about the logistical marvel of maintaining that across a remote island network.
Yeah, that's incredible.
And more impressively, their infant mortality rate dropped dramatically over the decades. It went from 80 deaths per 1,000 live births down to around 19.
That's a huge drop.
They essentially achieved universal health coverage, which drastically extended the life expectancy of their citizens.
But the flip side of surviving childhood and living longer is that you eventually get old. And while they conquered infectious diseases and infant mortality, the data highlights a heavy, heavy burden of chronic, non-communicable diseases as the population ages. Specifically, the data flags diabetes as a massive health risk in Palau right now.
And chronic diseases are incredibly expensive to treat long-term. You aren't just giving someone a vaccine once, right? You were talking about decades of medication, potential surgeries, and running dialysis machines on an island where electricity is already incredibly expensive.
Right, because of the diesel generators we talked about.
Exactly. So you have a shrinking young workforce that has to generate the domestic tax revenue to pay for the escalating healthcare costs of an aging population. It creates an exponential pressure on their social security systems.
But the young workforce they do have is incredibly impressive. I mean, the education statistics in the United Nations reports are mind-blowing for a remote microstate. They have 12 years of compulsory education, and the transition rate from primary to secondary school is near 100%.
Yeah, it's virtually universal.
Their literacy rate is literally 100%. How do they actually pull that off?
It requires a massive societal commitment. They don't just build schools. They ensure the logistical pathways for students exist, they heavily subsidize the materials, and they culturally enforce the value of education from a very young age.
Wow.
And when you look at the Human Capital Index, the data reveals something truly pivotal. about the mechanics of who is driving this progress.
Oh, right. So the Human Capital Index, just to clarify for the listener, is essentially a metric that calculates the expected future productivity of a child born today based on the health and education systems available to them. It's measured on a scale from 0 to 1.
Hmm.
And in Palau, the data shows a massive gender divide. The female human capital index is around 0.61, which is significantly higher than the male index, which sits around 0.56. So women are heavily driving Palau's educational and human capital progress.
The educational outcomes for women in Palau are just exceptional. Through higher completion rates in secondary and tertiary education, women have really positioned themselves as the intellectual powerhouse of the nation's future.
But, okay, if I can play devil's advocate for a second here.
Go.
You give everyone a world-class education, you achieve 100% literacy, you have this brilliant female-led generation of young minds, but your economy is 80% tourism.
Right.
Are you telling me these brilliant graduates with advanced degrees in law, medicine, or computer science are going to stay on the island just to manage hotel front desks and give us snorkeling tours? If your economy only offers service jobs, aren't you just effectively exporting your best minds to Australia or the US or Japan?
That is the most painful tension in the Palau model. It is the classic brain drain dilemma. When human capital development outpaces domestic economic complexity, the brightest minds inevitably seek opportunities abroad that match their skill levels. Because of Palau's specific diplomatic agreements, like the Compact of Free Association with the United States, their citizens have relative freedom of movement. Many live here for higher education and simply stay away for high-paying careers.
So it's a structural vulnerability. Palau spends all these resources, the healthcare, the 12 years of schooling, raising, and educating a child, and then a massive economy like the U.S. reaps the actual economic benefit of that adult's productivity.
It is a vulnerability.
Yeah.
But, it also represents their greatest opportunity for the future.
How so?
Remember those high female human capital index scores?
Yeah.
With women achieving these higher metrics, they are perfectly positioned to be the primary architects of Palau's next economic evolution.
Oh. Because if you have 100% literacy and high digital fluency, you don't need to rely solely on physical tourists landing on your island. You can export digital services.
Exactly. A transition away from a single-track tourism economy toward a digital, knowledge-based economy. You can become a hub for remote knowledge work, specialized financial services, or global conservation management. The highly educated women of Palau are the key to unlocking an economy that doesn't require physical cargo ships to function.
Ah, that is a brilliant pivot. But it leads us to the final looming shadow over all of this, because you can have the smartest population in the world, the best anti-corruption laws, and a thriving digital economy, but none of it will matter if your island is underwater.
Right.
We have to talk about the environmental paradox and their marine masterclass.
This highly educated, aging population faces one ultimate existential challenge that threatens to wash away all their societal progress. The environment is the ultimate board they are playing on.
Let's re-examine that paradox we brought up at the very beginning of the episode. We established the mechanism behind their high per capita greenhouse gas emissions, the reality that running a sovereign grid for 18,000 people creates a massive statistical spike. But it doesn't change the physical reality that they are tied to a fossil fuel lifeline. They are actively contributing, however minutely in global volume, to the very emissions that are melting the ice caps and raising the sea levels that threaten to drown them.
It is a tragic irony. You
Yeah.
need the cargo ships, you need the supply planes, you need the diesel grid just to survive the isolation.
Yeah.
Transitioning a remote island to 100% renewable energy is incredibly expensive and logistically complex. You can't just build a wind farm, right?
Right.
You have to import the turbines, maintain them with specialized parts that are thousands of miles away, and build massive battery storage systems to handle the intermittency.
So they are trapped in this fossil fuel loop just to keep the lights on, but then you look at what they do with the environment they actually can control. Since 2015, Palau has leaped to protecting 100% of its marine territorial area.
100%.
100%. And their terrestrial forest cover remains incredibly high, sitting at around 87%.
This is where the paradox resolves itself into a coherent strategy. Their emissions aren't due to reckless industrial pollution. They are a logistical necessity of isolation. But their conservation efforts are entirely a matter of sovereign choice. And they have chosen the most radical conservation model on the planet.
I want to make sure we really grasp the scale of 100% marine protection. They didn't just cordon off a little bay near a hotel and call it a nature reserve. They essentially declared their entire exclusive economic zone a sanctuary.
Yes.
But how do you actually enforce that? An EEZ extends 200 nautical miles out from the coast. That is a massive swath of the Pacific Ocean. You can't just put up a fence. How does an 18,000-person nation stop massive, industrialized, illegal fishing fleets from just plundering their waters?
It requires an incredible blend of diplomacy, technology, and governance. They use satellite tracking partnerships with international NGOs and foreign coast guards to monitor their waters.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, they leverage maritime domain awareness technologies to spot illegal vessels. But more importantly, it requires a complete paradigm shift in how a nation views its natural assets.
Because most countries look at an ocean and say, how many fish can we pull out of there to sell on the global market? How much offshore oil can we drill?
Exactly. The traditional economic model is purely extractive. You chop down the forest to sell the timber. You empty the ocean to sell the fish. Palau realized early on that their greatest asset wasn't dead fish. It was living fish.
Right.
The foundation of their entire tourism economy, which remember drives the vast majority of their service exports, is built on people coming to see a pristine, untouched environment.
If they destroy the reefs, they literally destroy their economy.
This is the Palau model of global ecological governance. Radical conservation is not viewed as a luxury. It isn't something they do just to feel good or to look good at climate conferences. It is their primary economic engine. Protecting the environment is the most ruthless, pragmatic, capitalist decision they could possibly make for their long-term survival.
By protecting 100% of the marine area, they create a global brand of exclusivity and pristine nature. They attract a higher-tier, eco-conscious tourist. So it's not about the sheer volume of visitors, it's about the value those visitors bring.
And this ties back directly to their world-class governance. You can declare a marine sanctuary on paper all day long, but if you have a corrupt government, illegal fishing fleets will just bribe the local harbor master, pay off a politician, and strip the ocean bare anyway.
Yeah, we see that all over the world.
Exactly. Palau's high rule of law and control of corruption are the invisible shields that actually keep those waters protected.
So the governance is the enforcement mechanism of the conservation.
Precisely. Every single piece of this data connects. The small geography forces a volatile economy. The volatile economy requires international aid and high-value tourism to survive. To secure that aid and protect that tourism, you need stellar, transparent governance.
And to maintain that stellar governance, you need a highly educated, 100% literate population. It is an incredibly delicate, incredibly resilient ecosystem of policy.
Which means we have to look at Palau's next chapter. Because as much as they have perfected this current model, the board they're playing on is fundamentally changing. The massive, unavoidable challenge leaning over everything we've discussed is climate change and sea level rise.
The data is stark. 16% of Palau's rural land sits at an elevation of under 5 meters.
Under 5 meters.
That is barely 16 feet above sea level. When you factor in king tides, worsening storm surges, and the accelerating melt of global ice sheets, that land is in immediate critical danger.
We aren't just talking about losing some beach.
No, not at all.
We are talking about saltwater intrusion, ruining the agricultural soil, destroying freshwater aquifers, and literally washing away the coastal infrastructure that supports their tourism.
And the tragic reality is that they cannot solve sea level rise on their own, no matter how perfect their governance is. They are entirely at the mercy of the carbon emissions of the rest of the planet. So what is the path forward for them? They have to leverage that human capital, specifically that female-led, highly educated base. They have to use their world-class governance to execute a rapid digital transformation. They must decouple their economy from sheer physical tourism.
If the beaches are eroding and global pandemics or oil shocks make air travel unreliable, they need an economy that exists in the cloud, an economy governed by the exact same transparency and rule of law that protects their physical roofs today. They need to become an intellectual haven, just as they are an ecological haven.
If we synthesize everything we've looked at today across all these data sets, from the World Bank spreadsheets to the UN Human Capital reports, the core takeaway is just profound. Palau proves that in a volatile, dangerous world, a nation's strongest defense isn't a massive standing army. It isn't vast, deep reserves of oil or natural gas.
It is governance. Good governance is the primary productive force for survival. It is the shock absorber that prevents an economic contraction from becoming a societal collapse. It is the foundation that allows an island of 18,000 people to negotiate on the world stage and protect an entire ocean.
When we look at Palau, we aren't looking for massive industrial output. We are looking for resilience. We are looking for adaptability. And honestly, sifting through all this data leaves me with one lingering, extremely provocative thought for you to mull over as we wrap up today.
What's that?
Think about the scale of what we've discussed. If a microstate of barely 18,000 people, constantly threatened by absolute economic collapse from a single global event, constantly threatened by rising tides that could wipe them off the map,
Right.
if they can manage to protect 100% of their oceans, if they can achieve 100% literacy, and if they can maintain top-tier governmental transparency that puts larger nations to shame, what exactly is the excuse of the world's massive, resource-rich superpowers?
That is the ultimate question.
Could it be that the true blueprint for humanity's future in a climate-threatened world isn't being written in the massive halls of Washington, Beijing, or London? Could it be that the actual survival guide for the next century is currently being written on a tiny 460 square kilometer island in the middle of the Pacific? If Palau can figure out how to survive and protect the planet, maybe it's time the giants of the world started taking notes.